Behind the Shades.
I am Michelle Dewitt. I am a well-known author of the book I've Been There. And I have an organization called Unbreakable Faith. We are a mentorship organization that caters to youth and young adults. We start at the age 7 to 17 for the youth and 18 to 22 for young adults. We cater to male and females that have been sexually abused and dealt with sex trafficking, molestation, all of that negative stuff that nobody wants to talk about or shuns away from. We handle that uniqueness with our program. And so that's what we do. We also talk with parents to give them an outline of what to look for when it comes down to their child and predators. We do a workshop with that as well. My website is unbrkfth.com, which is the initial for Unbreakable Faith. I'm on Twitter. I am on Instagram, Facebook. I'm out there. Unbreakable Faith. And author underscore Dewitt on Instagram.
Perfect. So take us right from the very beginning of how you got started in all of this. How did you get involved and why did you get involved?
Well, I got involved a couple of years ago. I am a minister, a youth pastor. At the time, I was doing talking to the youth and sharing a very little bit about some of the experiences that I had. And I also worked with women groups and talking with the women in regards to being able to handle some situations. And my friend said to me, Michelle, share your story all the time. Why don't you book? And I'm like, I don't even journal. What are you talking about writing a book? I don't do that. And so she coached me in it, and she was my coach ever since, to go through the whole process. She helped me with coaching, and she also is a publicist. So she was able to publish my book. My book title is I've Been There. And in my book, I do talk, it's an autobiography about me and what I went through as a child dealing with being molested at the age 3.5, 4 years old. I talk about that in my book, and I talk about being raped at 14 as a teenager. That's why I'm so passionate about my organization, Unbreakable Faith, because of all of the trauma and horrific events that had taken place in my life. I grew up in a home with domestic violence, and my dad was very abusive to my mother and to us, verbally and physically abusive. So this is how I got started with this. Like I said before, I've always loved working with the youth. The youth keep me young, they keep me beautiful and young.
I know for me growing up, there were some things of my childhood that I look back and I wish that I didn't actually experience it because I grew up without my mother or my father. And good old grandmother, Big Mama, as we used to call her back in the day, she was there for me. And I look at so many people who I speak with and who I help, because one of the ways that I was able to survive and do everything was the church was a big, big part of my life. And from the church, I remember sports being that because I was a child that I didn't ever fall victim to the streets. Thank the good Lord for that. And sometimes I look back with at my past bittersweet because I didn't enjoy it overall. But then sometimes as I got older, I realized that maybe my parents were doing the best that they could do with what they knew at that time. And as you look back, putting aside the molestation and things like that, outside of maybe the way that they would handle you, I guess is an accurate way to put it. Do you think that maybe that was like a learned behavior, or is it just, hey, my parents were just monsters, Terrain?
No, actually looking back at it, just like you said, My parents, they didn't know how to handle things. I still talk with my dad today. My mom, she has gone on to glory. I miss her tremendously. But my dad, even though we went through a lot of things, just like you, going to church, I was brought up with going to church with my grandmother. My mom didn't go a lot, and my dad didn't go at all. But growing up, I think they were just trying to figure it out, you know? And my dad, I believe he dealt with, a man working. And in that time, back in those days, you're working and you get no acknowledgments or anything. He worked, his butt off. And he wasn't an alcoholic. He didn't drink at all. The most I've seen my daddy do, he still does it today, smoke cigars. That's the most he's ever done. But I believe he was frustrated with life and being a male. It's tough. And here it is, you have a family and you have I have step brothers and sisters that are older than me. I mean, step sisters that's older than me. But, I just believe looking back now that it was just hard on my daddy and he had a lot of frustration and nowhere to blow off steam.
What's something that you wish was different about your childhood experience and maybe you could rewrite, so to speak?
Hmm. Um, I wish that my relationship with my dad was more a whole lot better, a lot closer. Um, I wish that if I could go back to be able to talk with my dad about some of the things that happened to me without being fearful that he would blow up and be mad at me. I would love to have that childhood little girl that goes to her father and have those conversations.
I think that's very important because that's something, and I'm glad you answered that way, because that's something that I always wanted. I always wanted to, even though he's not like the best person anymore, but I wanted like that life of the Cosbys, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Where the parents were so supportive, instead of my life was more like the Jeffersons, where it was a lot of craziness and a lot of name calling. But what I
Right.
loved about it is that I felt when I watched those shows that I was inspired to know that there's people that look like me, there's people that speak like me, that have the type of family that I wanted. And
Mhm.
even though I didn't grow up with it, I knew as an adult there's two things I wanted to do. One, I want to be totally different than my parents and their experience. And two, if I would ever have a family, I had examples. And
Yeah.
right. And there's one thing I was watching an interview, and there's a story about George Jefferson, since we mentioned the Jeffersons. And he was someone that he grew up in the poor side of his city. And he
Mhm.
worked hard, and him and his wife moved up to the upper side, upper east side, I think it was. And so they're in a wealthier area. And even though it was a show, I remember it being so inspiring.